you download the dog bandana pattern, it will print out on 2 pages. Just make sure that they are formatted for 100% and not scaled to a different percentage. So to tape, we're going to tape them together. So I like to use a paper trimmer to trim off the edges along the dotted lines. And we're just going to trim off this one edge since this is where the papers connect, and then we'll line them up, match up the dotted lines, and tape them together. And then you'll see there are 5 sizes to choose from. Just kind of pick the size of the collar that your dog wears. All right, so we're gonna tape it together, and then I'm gonna make the size extra large since my dog is pretty big. So we're gonna cut out along those edges, the extra large size. If you have cardstock, it'll make a sturdier pattern piece for you, so I recommend using a cardstock. I'm using a 65-pound cardstock, and that is a good weight for that. That way you can cut a bunch all at once or use it multiple times. So, okay, there's the pattern piece, and I am going to do this leopard print on one side and a zigzag on the other side. So this is a reversible bandana. So pick 2 cute fabrics. If you want to do interfacing, you can. And what I'm going to do is, so we need 1 main and 1 lining. And I'm going to stack 2 fabrics so I can cut them out at the same time. Do 1 here. Now I'm going to pin the pattern piece to the fabric. And then using fabric scissors, we'll cut it out. You can also use a rotary cutter for this if you want, but since there's a lot of angles, I like to use scissors. So if you're going to do interfacing, cut another layer from interfacing and then fuse it to the back of one of your fabrics. And we have 2 pieces for our bandana. I interfaced the back of the white fabric. I just like to interface the lighter fabric so that it's a little bit less see-through. And then we're going to sew these together at the top. So line them up with right sides facing at the top and just add a few pins. And then we're going to sew across the top with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we're just sewing across the top, leaving all the rest open. All right, so I've sewn across the top at 1/4 inch and then taken the pins out. And now we are going to open up the bandana and press it with the seam allowance going one way. So mine's going to go toward the darker fabric, the leopard fabric. So we'll press that and then we'll top stitch. All right, so I pressed that open and then I pressed the seam allowance toward the leopard fabric on the back side. And then I stitched along the leopard fabric at about 1/8 of an inch. That is called understitching, and what will happen is when we have this as a lining, it'll kind of keep the two layers separate, so you'll have a nicer finish there at the top. So the next step is to open it back up and then trim any threads that you see along the seams or along the edges. And then what we're going to do is on both sides of the bandana, we're going to finish the casing. So how we're going to do that is fold under 1/4 inch and press, and then do it again to get a nice finished, clean finished edge. And then we'll top stitch along that. So fold over those edges twice and then press it really well. And now we're going to top stitch along that side to finish it off. And we'll do that on both sides of the bandana. After you've sewn the sides, trim off any extra threads you have, and those will be the sides of the casing. So now we're gonna sew the bandana together. And the way we're gonna do that is fold it with the right sides together, matching up the casing edges, and the rest of the bandana will match together as well. So we're going to match it up, and I'll put some pins in there to hold it. So we're going to sew through the sides here and the bottom of the bandana, but we're going to leave the casings open. This will create a casing at the top where the collar can go through. So we're going to thread the collar through. So just make sure you're lining up all the edges. And then we're going to sew from where the casing begins down to the edge, wrap back up all the way to the top, and back stitch at both the beginning and the end. So I've sewn that seam, and then I'm going to take the pins out and then clip the edges here of the bottom of the bandana. We'll clip this edge a little bit so that we get a little bit of a better point. It's not a perfect point right here, but just trim that seam allowance. You can trim the seam allowance up the edges a little bit too if you want. And then what we're going to do next is turn the bandana right side out through one of these edges. You might want to get a little chopstick or a turner, a point turner to help you with this. This hole is not tiny, so it's not too bad of a turn. So we're gonna flatten it out. Sometimes I'll use my scissors closed to carefully push out the edges. Okay, so I am going to go press this really well, and take your point turner with you when you go to press, and then we'll do the final step. All right, after pressing it really well, we're going to draw a line from one edge of the casing to the other. So we want it to be straight. The casing will end up being between 1.5 and 2 inches, depending on what size you're creating. I'm going to use the purple side of this marker because it is air soluble. So I'll just draw a line right down there, and then stick a pin or two in it and just sew that. That'll be a top stitching line that will create that casing. If you have a thinner collar, if you know your collar is thinner, you can draw the casing up a little bit to make it a tighter fit. But then just sew along that purple line. Clip your threads and then you are finished, and you can go slip this on your dog's collar. So this is reversible, and this hole in the top creates the casing for the collar. And there's your dog bandana. I hope you enjoyed this project. You can find more videos on YouTube CK Sew.